Darren, if we go back to the early hours of the evening, about 4 hours ago, initial reports and activity along the northern border suggested that a ground invasion was imminent. We saw a lot of activity, particularly in the northwestern corner of Gaza, and in that area we saw a lot of light flares, followed by a barrage of artillery fire into the northern parts. Immediately after that, we started receiving calls from a lot of eyewitnesses who really live along the front lines of what is now that battle zone, and essentially started telling us that there was a lot of tank activity, a lot of tanks amassing on the border, particularly in the area of Dugit on the Israeli side of the northwest corner of Gaza. At the same time, we started getting calls from residents in the Beit Hanun area, which is right adjacent to what the Israelis call Erez, the Israeli terminal. And that is a major crossing point for the people between Gaza and into Israel. And their reports started coming in that tanks had actually entered, and soon after that, the Israeli military obviously confirmed that the second phase of this operation, the ground invasion, had actually begun. Immediately following that, we've been hearing a barrage of airstrikes where we are, and in fact, two massive explosions just a few hundred meters from where we are standing, completely rattling the building. One of them at an orphanage behind us, affected the target obviously for the Israelis, but no clear information on what activity was going on there, but it is known to be an orphanage here in Gaza City. And to the southbound of us, another massive explosion at a security compound that was already targeted earlier in the airstrikes, and those are probably the two major explosions you're probably seeing on the screen there. Those explosions, we could feel the heat from the explosions themselves. Obviously, for several minutes afterward, we could feel and smell the debris that was coming towards our way. And still, now hours after this operation began, we can hear shelling off to the border and hear Israeli warplanes flying above overhead. So certainly the operation very much in full swing here. Another very terrifying night for the people of Gaza, who certainly will not be getting any peace or tranquility that the Israeli defense minister was alluding to for the residents of southern Israel throughout this particular campaign, Darren.
Ayman, just roll back the clock for our viewers to take us through the moments before the incursion happened. We were talking to you earlier, and you mentioned about the intensity of the barrage is increasing. So perhaps that was a clue to the onset of the ground operation. Just take us back through what happened earlier on this evening.
Well, it actually, Darren, began slightly late yesterday evening. In fact, when we started seeing a very heavy concentration of bombardment on the northern front, that led people here to speculate that Israel was beginning to soften up the terrain, so to speak, to try to clear the area of landmines, explosions, booby traps, anything that could harm the advance of the Israeli military. Earlier in the evening, we saw light flares, artillery shells, helicopters flying above overhead, dropping light flares that essentially light up the sky in a particular area. And what those light flares really do is kind of give an added advantage to the military operating nearby to see what it is that is happening on the ground. Immediately following those light flares, you would see a series of strikes being launched from Israeli helicopters that we could hear hovering overhead. And in fact, we've seen at that particular time, saw at least 6 or 7 rockets being targeted in a very specific area in the northern and northwest part of the Gaza Strip, and that's the area where I was referring to on the opposite side, is the Israeli town of Dugit, where the eyewitnesses were telling us the troops were amassing. And so that has been the case, coupled by the bombardment I was referring to earlier on the northern part, gave a lot of impetus to the argument that a ground invasion was indeed imminent, and that it would take place anytime soon. And in fact, what we're seeing now, 1 week to the very beginning of this airstrike, 8 days into it, the Israeli ground operation has begun, and that again has left people here extremely nervous and apprehension. There was hope amid all of the international talk and diplomatic talk that the French President Nicolas Sarkozy would be arriving to Israel to meet with Israeli and Palestinian counterparts, that there could be some kind of break in this impasse. And so certainly there was optimism among some Palestinians, but the reality of that optimism obviously completely now dissolved because of the operation that has begun. Darren.
Okay, Ayman Mohyeddin there live for us in Gaza. Ayman, take care. Thank you. We'll obviously talk to you a little bit later in the programme. Let's cross over live to London now and talk to James Denslow. He's a security analyst, and he joins me live from our London studio. James Denslow, the Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak there saying that the aim was to stop Hamas's rockets being fired into southern Israel. Can they achieve this objective by this ground incursion, do you think?
I think that there's a hidden text in what all the Israeli officials you've spoken to tonight have said, and that is that they want to simply destroy Hamas, and so they're not necessarily concerned with rocket fire coming again in a later date that they can go back into Gaza to stop. They consider this to be the last battle with Hamas, and they're going in incredibly heavy, and I think that we should stop and think tonight it's not just a case of what's happening at the front line, it's the case of half the population of Gaza are children, and every single one of them will be listening to a large-scale war on their doorstep, so we have to really have our thoughts with them tonight.
Listen, just take us through, I mean, you're a military analyst. I mean, how difficult is it going to be to operate in the sorts of terrain that stretch across the Gaza Strip? I mean, here we have tanks and armoured vehicles and armoured personnel carriers, troops on the ground going in across the Strip, but it's not going to be easy, is it?
Well, there's two examples I think we can look to. There's, of course, what happened in southern Lebanon when Israel went in and fought with Hezbollah, and then there's when the conventional army went into a large Arab city in 2005 in Fallujah. Of course, in Fallujah, the civilian population was allowed to leave first. In Gaza, the civilian population has nowhere to go. So if there is going to be a similar large-scale armed attack, such as the one the Americans conducted in Fallujah in Gaza, we can expect a simply massive, horrific death toll. In terms of what happened in southern Lebanon, I would say the Israelis were far more surprised by the actual type of weapons that Hezbollah had. They had anti-ship missiles, they had quite complicated anti-tank missiles, and they were very well prepared. Gaza, on the other hand, I mean, Israel knows Gaza a lot better. It's occupied it for 40 years or so. It surrounds it. It has people inside working and telling people what's going on, and it's been monitoring the tunnels too. The real X factor, if there is any at all here, in terms of comparing the two sides, is whether Hamas or any other resistance movement has been able to smuggle in through these tunnels any type of munitions that can cause problems for the Israeli military. And that's the thing we have to watch for now, I guess.
Would Hamas have learned any lessons from that summer of 2006 conflict with Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon? I mean, would there be things they could draw on? Because in some respects there are some similarities.
Well, I'm sure they would try to learn lessons, but as I say, the situation is fairly different in the sense that there's far less ability for them to resupply, to be equipped with the types of munitions that would have to be used to cause any problems for the IDF. When the IDF entered into the West Bank during the second Intifada, they would famously bypass through any prepared mines or explosive device by simply driving through people's houses. And that, of course, meant that anything you plant is pretty useless. And so, once again, if those tactics are applied, there's very little to do to prepare. And if every military site that there is in Gaza is next to a hospital or a school or an area where a civilian population is hiding, the difficulty in terms of targeting one group and managing to avoid the other it's almost impossible.
James Denslow, just a final question to you. Just take us through the sort of telltale signs that we saw today in terms of the artillery coming into the attack, the sort of increased missile intensity in terms of the prepping, the build-up as a precursor for the incursion.
Yes, this is a full-scale combined arms assault that you would expect from a high-tech, one of the top armies in the entire world, fighting against another conventional military force. Of course, Hamas is not that. It's a very different type of force. It's an asymmetrical force that relies upon its ability to focus its strengths against its opponent's weaknesses. In the past, that of course has been the case of homemade missiles or short-range missiles, 30 miles or so, which can be fired indiscriminately and cause a lot of terror and panic and alarm in Israel. That is a world away from the type of munitions that would be required to fight against Israel. And Israel, of course, is taking no chances, which is why you're seeing a week worth of airstrikes to soften the ground, as it's said, followed by an assault with air, land, sea at night, which is when low-tech armies find it very hard to fight.
Okay, James Denslow there, military analyst in London. Thank you very much indeed for your insight and analysis. These are live pictures on our screens now of the latest pictures we're getting in here at Al Jazeera of a massive explosion that Ayman Mohyeddin, our correspondent in Gaza, was talking about earlier. We know the Israelis are stepping up the bombardment, the missiles and the artillery as the ground troops go in. So these are latest pictures here you're seeing on your screens here at Al Jazeera of one of those explosions, a massive explosion. Ahmed Mohideen was saying they felt it where they were. Now you're seeing the after effects of it, the fire, the smoke from that, whether it's a missile strike or artillery strike, we're not sure, but one of the explosions from about 30 minutes ago. Well, we're now joined by